Come on, come on, come on, let me show you what it's all about. Reading, writing, reading, all the branches on the learning tree. Education ain't complete, she's just gonna show you how to get it in. Listen to me, baby, that's all you gotta do.
Today's lesson is writing lesson number 6. Our learning targets for today are: I can list the steps of the writing process in the correct order, recall terms, facts, and rules associated with the writing process, and follow the steps of the writing process when writing. When a person writes, there are steps that he or she should follow. What are these steps called? It's called the writing process. Think of it, the writing process, kind of as a checklist. You do the first thing and then you move on to the next until you have all 5 things completed. I already answered the first one if you were listening, this question. How many steps are there in the writing process? There are 5. So notice the visual here. We have 5 boxes because there are 5 steps in the writing process. Now, often I teach you mnemonic devices to help you remember things. So this next question, what is a mnemonic device that can be used to remember the steps of the writing process? The mnemonic device is PDRPP. PDRPP. Each of those letters stands for the step of a writing process. Prewrite, draft, revise, proofread, and publish. So if you'll remember PDRPP, that will help you remember the steps of the writing process. Let's explore each of the steps. First, prewrite. This is when the writer gathers and organizes ideas into a plan. So here's your visual. You have your writer, you have your topic at the very top, and then you'll probably have about 3 main ideas that you'll be talking about, and then under those main ideas, you'll have your support or your details. So think about prewrite. What does the prefix pre mean? It means before. So obviously, prewriting is something that you do before beginning to write or draft. So before we begin to write or draft, it is important to have a plan for writing. And a lot of students may think that it's a waste of time, but if you prewrite, it will actually save you time later. If the writer makes a plan, the drafting stage will go much smoother. Sometimes you might have good ideas, but if you forget to write them down, you may forget them later. And then when you're writing, you'll have to stop and it'll take some time to remember those points. So making a plan for writing is very important. Now, there are 2 tasks that a writer should do to prewrite. The first one is analyze the writing prompt, and the second one is make a pre-writing plan. Now, what's a mnemonic device that can be used to remember how to analyze a writing prompt? Spam it. Spam. Spam is going to be a mnemonic device that can be used to remember how to analyze a writing prompt. And again, we take each of the letters and it will help remember each of the steps to analyze a writing prompt. So you've probably heard of spam. Here's the visual image of it. A can of spam. Well, we're not thinking of that. We're thinking of S stands for subject, P stands for piece, A stands for audience, and M stands for mode. So we're going to identify each of these things in the writing prompt. So subject basically is going to be the topic. It's going to be the focus, the subject matter, and what you're going to be talking about for your writing piece. And then the piece is actually going to be the writing form or format. That's going to be how you arrange your writing piece. So there may be different forms or pieces that you'll be asked to write, like an essay or a speech, a letter, and they'll have specific parts that you'll use. So it's kind of the piece is going to be how your writing is formed or arranged. The audience, we also need to identify who the audience is. That's going to be whoever the reader or readers, and then the listener or listeners. So you need to know who is going to be listening. And then lastly, the mode, this is going to be the writing type. The writing type could be informative, explanatory, it could be persuasive, argumentative, or it could be narrative. And you'll identify key words in the writing prompt to help you identify the mode of writing. After we analyze the prompt by spamming it, it is suggested that the writer make a pre-writing plan using a graphic organizer. So graphic organizer is going to be a visual. So remember that you kind of have that main topic at the top, and then you kind of have the branches down that kind of shows your first idea, second idea, third idea, and then of course underneath those you would have your support. So the first thing that goes in the top box is going to be your thesis statement. Now that's not necessarily just your topic, it's kind of going to be your view on the topic. And we'll talk more about how to write a thesis statement later. Second, you're going to select 3 reasons or your 3 ideas to support your thesis. And then thirdly, you're going to select 3 supporting details for each reason. Now, how much time should a writer take to pre-write for on-demand writing? How much time do you think would be reasonable? Most on-demand prompts, the standalone prompt is going to be about 40 minutes. How much of that do you think is a reasonable amount to pre-write? I would say it's suggested that students take approximately 5 minutes to pre-write. It's okay if you take a little longer or a little less, but 5 minutes is a good goal. 5 to 7 is going to be a good goal for you for pre-writing. Now think about this. If a writer has 40 minutes to complete the prompt, taking more than 5 minutes is not going to leave you very much time for the most important part, which is drafting, and then you also want to leave time for revising, proofreading, and editing. So no more than 5 to 7 minutes, and 5 is kind of your guide. All right, let's move on to draft. This is when the writer is going to turn ideas from the pre-writing plan into words. Now, what term is often used to refer to this step of the writing process? That's going to be called the rough draft. So if you think about it, when you're drafting, it doesn't matter if it has mistakes. It may not be the neatest. It still needs to be legible. But sometimes this first draft is going to be, we know it's going to be changed. So just remember, it does not have to be perfect. That's why it's called the rough draft. Now, while drafting, a writer really should not worry too much about making errors. Now, does this mean that you shouldn't worry about doing the basics like capitalizing sentences or putting in punctuation marks or indenting? No, you should still go ahead and do those things, but don't worry too much about little things like spelling or maybe your word choice. You can always go back and work on those later. So no, definitely still do the basics, do your best, but make sure don't interrupt the flow of your writing by worrying about errors that can be corrected later. So we can go back and make those changes and improvements later. Now think about how much time do you think should be spent on drafting for on-demand writing? So think about it. Oftentimes with a particular writing prompt, your goal is kind of about 5 paragraphs. So think about how much time to write a paragraph, how much time for the whole writing piece. So here's your suggestion. It's suggested that students take approximately 5 minutes per paragraph on the drafting stage. So think about if a student writes 5 paragraphs, then that would be a total of 25 minutes for drafting. So you've got 40 minutes total. You take 5 at the very beginning to pre-write, about 25 minutes for drafting, and then of course the time at the end will be spent for revising and proofreading. And so next, revise. This is when the writer makes improvements to his or her writing. And so kind of think about this visual here. You're looking at your piece. You might be kind of taking some things out. You might be adding, moving things around. And I kind of already gave you the hint here. In what ways might a writer revise? You might add, delete, combine, rearrange. You're not fixing errors. You're making improvements. And then think about, in what areas might a writer revise? What sort of things might you improve in your writing piece? Well, that might include your ideas, your organization, your word choice, your sentence fluency, and your voice. And we'll talk more about each of these items later. So think about, what are some specific things that can be done while revising? Well, thinking about ideas, we've talked in the past about fries. Well, maybe your support sentences focused heavily on facts or reasons. At this time, when you're revising, you can go back and maybe incorporate some more interesting types of fries for support sentences. For example, maybe you could put in an interview or a statistic. So make your ideas stronger and more unique. Next, organization. This one shouldn't take too long if you wrote the correct way to begin with, but you just want to make sure that the writing piece has all the correct parts. For example, most writing pieces are going to have an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. And then we also want to make sure that our paragraphs have the correct parts, and that's going to have, topics, support, and especially you want to look back, make sure you have a good, strong conclusion sentence. Another thing that we can improve in the revising stage is going to be word choice. If you'll look through your document and identify words that might be elementary or kind of babyish or boring, and we want to make sure that we replace those elementary words with sophisticated words. So using that provided thesaurus/dictionary is going to come in handy for improving our vocabulary. And then voice, one thing you can do is add some descriptive language or figurative language. And these kind of overlaps with reading class, things that writers or authors do in the books and the stories that you read in reading class, or things that you can do to make people want to read your writing. So for example, descriptive language, you can use imagery, rhymes, alliterations, onomatopoeias. For figurative language, you can do similes, metaphors, hyperboles, or idioms. And that's going to make our writing much more detailed, much more interesting to the reader. Now, how much time should be spent on revising for on-demand? Well, think about it. 5 for pre-writing, about 5 per paragraph, for a total of 25 minutes for drafting. It is suggested that students take approximately 5 minutes on revising. And I'd say this is one stage that sometimes doesn't get the amount of time that it deserves. So try to get done early with your drafting so that you can take some time for revising. It's so important that a student leave time at the end of the prompt for revising. And the reason for that is because with revising, you're making improvements, and that's going to ensure that you have a quality piece of writing. And then next, proofread, PDRPP, okay? This is going to be where the writer corrects errors. So revising is going to be making improvements. This is actually changing things that are incorrect. So we want to get our pencil out and we want to use our eraser. So think about this. In what areas might a writer make errors or need to correct errors? Remember what we've studied before? That's called conventions. The conventions of standard English are going to include the rules of our English language, and they kind of are broken down into 4 categories: spelling, capitalization, punctuation, and grammar and usage. So how should a writer fix errors for on-demand? Make sure that you use a pencil to erase the errors and to correct them. You definitely do not want to use a red pen or even pencil to mark the editing symbols. That would be for other times that we write in language arts class or other classes, and we are going to do publishing and doing a final draft. But for on demand, you only get this rough draft, so you don't want to scratch things out or use a pen. Just erase it and make your corrections. So how much time should be spent for proofreading on-demand writing? Well, if you think about how much time is left, again, you want to take about 5 minutes on proofreading. So you got 5 minutes for pre-writing, about 5 per paragraph for a total of 25 minutes for drafting, 5 for revising, and then 5 for proofreading. So that should be 5 plus 25 is 30, plus 5 plus 5 is 40, and that takes up your 40-minute writing prompt. So it is, just like it is important to leave time for revising, it's very important for a student to leave time at the end of a prompt for proofreading. Again, it's to ensure a quality writing piece, because if you turn in a writing piece that has lots of errors, it's going to distract the audience, the readers, the listeners from the quality ideas that you're trying to convey. And this step is going to be where the writing process stops for on-demand. As I mentioned briefly before, a lot of times when you do a writing assignment that's not for on-demand, you're going to have that time to take that revising and that editing and do a whole new copy. But because of the timed aspect of on-demand, you're not going to have time to do a whole nother copy. So you make your improvements and your changes, and this is where you will stop for on-demand. Now, for other times that you might be doing a writing piece, you will have the last step of the writing process, which is publish. This is where the writer produces an improved and corrected draft. So that might be done a few different ways. But think about what term is often used to refer to this step of the writing process. Think about it. If the drafting stage was referred to as the rough draft, what is the publishing stage referred to? And that is final draft. This is often referred to the final draft of a writing piece. Now, this step may include the student rewriting the piece using very neat handwriting, or possibly typing the piece using a word processor. Now, there are many advantages to using a program like Microsoft Word to publish. So anytime you have access to a computer or another technology device to type your piece, it is highly suggested for a few reasons. First of all, legibility. Sometimes, especially if a student has poor handwriting, typing the document is going to make it where the reader can read it much easier. And then next, presentation. It looks neater. You have margins and just the print. You can double space, makes it easier to read. Again, the legibility, the font is going to be much easier to read. It's going to just look much nicer as a whole. And then lastly, you'll have certain tools that you can use, such as a spelling and grammar checker and a thesaurus that you can actually use to look up replacements for words to improve your vocabulary. So those are just a few reasons why. So anytime that you get the opportunity to use Microsoft Word, please take it. It's for any assignment that you do for language arts class or other classes, I will always let you do it and basically suggest it if you are able to do so. Now, let's see if we accomplished our learning targets. I can list the steps of the writing process in the correct order. I taught you a mnemonic device that should help you to be able to do that. And then next, you should be able to remember each step of the writing process, those terms, the facts, the rules that are associated with the writing process, and the things that you do in each of the stages. And then lastly, you should be able to follow the steps of the writing process when writing. So in the upcoming days and weeks and in your future, anytime that you do a writing piece, whether it's for language arts, for on demand, for another class, you want to go through the writing process when writing. There's a reason for that. That process is going to help ensure a good quality piece. So again, thank you for your listening today on writing lesson number 6.